Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of what I consider to be some Goodreads snubs. These are some fantasy, both young adult and adult, books that I think should have been on the list of nominees. Some of these I was actually really surprised were not on there. There's a couple that I knew probably wouldn't be on there, but I still wish they had been. And part of the reason is that while I know a lot of us are very aware that the Goodreads nominees are a popularity contest, I still think a lot of us end up seeing things that we'd not actually heard that much about, and we like using the nominees as a way to maybe get outside our specific bubbles and find some things that we might have really enjoyed had we branched out a little bit more. And I know I'm that way not just for other genres, but even for fantasy. I also am within a certain bubble here on BookTube. There's a certain, you could say, subgenre of fantasy that I think a lot of booktubers gravitate toward, and so there are some fantasy books that pop up that I am really surprised by and I don't know that much about, but I end up giving them a shot and I really like them. So if you're like that, then some of these hopefully are ones that you'll be interested in. And then of course there's a couple that are just popular and I thought that they were worth the hype and they weren't on the list, and that made me sad. And the first one, I genuinely really thought this one would be on there, would be Bonesmith by Nicki Pau-Preto. I don't know if this one wasn't on there because it just doesn't have as much hype as a Stephanie Garber or oh my gosh, I'm totally spacing. Cassandra Clare. I kept thinking it was 2 S's instead of 2 C's. Cassandra Clare. She's not on that level of hype, but I have seen a lot of people pick this one up and really enjoy it, have a lot of fun with it. And she's pretty well known at this point. Again, she's not that level, but I think that she's kind of established herself in the young adult fantasy sphere. And this one was just such a good time. The only thing I could really think of as to why this one wouldn't be there is that maybe it just didn't get the same level of marketing to really put it on people's radar. But then also accompanying that, I also find this one kind of fits comfortably in if we had new adult. I could see this one fitting in new adult. It's not extremely explicit or anything like that. It just has a little bit more world building to it than I've seen, not just of YA, but even some adult fantasy books. I think this one's world building was fantastic and it was really cool, and I enjoyed all the little details that Nicki Pau-Preto clearly thought through when developing this story. And the characters, though, are very fun. They have a lot of personality, they come to life, and the story just moves really well. It's a little cliche at the beginning, but once you get past that, I think it fits well into its own. It does its own thing really well. So I was so sad that this one wasn't on there. I thought it would have been such a great way for people that maybe only really dip their toes in YA fantasy here and there to have their eyes open to this book's existence, but alas, it wasn't there, so I'm sad. This next one, I knew this one wasn't going to be on there. I knew it, but I still was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if it was. But I think that I am a little bit in the minority on really, really, really liking this one, and that would be City of Nightmares. I thought this book was so weird and unique and quirky and morbid, and I had such a good time with it. Those things, though, are not always, they don't create a recipe that is the end result being appealing to everybody. I feel like quirky and weird and morbid is not everybody's cup of tea, and it's not always mine either, but when it lands, it's like, oh, it's just so fun. And I had a great time with this one. If you don't know, the setup is that people's nightmares can transform them. They can essentially come to life. So if you have an extreme fear of sharks or snakes or something like that, or spiders, you can become one. And then you live as your nightmare, and you are in existence in the real world, where there are now people who their jobs are to be taking you out if you are a threat to the rest of mankind, which a lot of people turn into giant spiders and snakes and things like that, and thus they need to be taken out. And our main character witnessed a horrific event as a child where somebody in her family became a nightmare and killed another family member, and then they were killed. And so our main character has been just terrified since then of nightmares. And they have found solutions to help people from dreaming in any way. But there are still some people that end up not they put it in the tap water, basically. And so everybody's supposed to drink the tap water. You also have certain, I think, medication you can take to really ensure that you don't dream. But some people forget, or they skip it, or something happens and they have a nightmare. So they still exist, just not to the extreme that they used to. And anyway, it's so weird. And it doesn't sound like it would be funny, but I feel like the author wrote a lot of humor into this as well. And the creativity was just fantastic. How society would handle that situation, I thought she explored that in an interesting way. So I had a lot of fun with it, but I think it's a little too weird for some people, or they just don't like the plot or the character. And there's plenty of legitimate reasons why people don't love it, but I had a good time with it, so I'd wished it had been on there. Next up, this one, I don't want to say it hurt me because that's dramatic, but I was like, really? I was really bummed it wasn't, and that would be Godkiller. Godkiller was so good. It's so good, and I was so excited. It was a great debut, so I was like, at least debut, right? If it's not in a fantasy category, maybe it can be a debut, and it wasn't on anything. And that really bummed me out because I thought this book was fantastic. I can't wait for the next one. It's one of my favorite books of the year. And I've described it many times as being like, what if the Witcher series was actually more about Geralt and Ciri? Because if you've read the Witcher books, you know that eventually it follows all these other people and you're like, can we just follow Geralt and Ciri again? So what if it did? And instead of being a monster hunter, our main character killed gods. And that's sort of a good brief way to describe this story. I really liked it. I was wondering initially if it wouldn't end up on the nominees because when it first came out, it was only available in the UK. But I believe its paperback release in the US actually did come out in time for the eligibility release date window. And I think it's done pretty well for itself. So I really thought it had a good chance. I actually even had in my predictions video a specific book that I was like, I don't think this one will show up, and that was Atalanta by Jennifer Saint, because I haven't seen as much hype for that one as Jennifer Saint's previous books, and I was wrong. Atalanta was there and Godkiller wasn't. I was like, dang it. But anyway, next up we have a couple that once again I was like, yeah, I get why they're not there. And well, I shouldn't say I get why they're not there. I just mean they're not as popular, but I still think they should have been there. And we have The Magician's Daughter fitting within that. I really think that so many people would enjoy this one. It is such a great coming-of-age story, which is, I think, sort of a staple trope in fantasy. And it's one that's been done so many times, a lot of us have strayed away from it. But when it's done well, I still think it's one of my favorite tropes to see. It's just the it being done well part that is hard to find, because I have noticed that the coming of age is often a character that's just unbearable at the beginning and we're just waiting until they're more likable, and I didn't think that was the case at all with this one. The setup is that you follow this girl who has grown up on this island raised by a man who is a magician, and he is essentially her father because he has raised her since the time she was very little, and their relationship is really sweet. He's very protective of her in that they live on this island that is magically guarded against everyone else, and she doesn't really know his past. He doesn't really allow her to leave the island for fear that once she crosses the barrier, then people will be able to find her. He has a familiar, and it's a bunny, and it's really cute. And they're all just this cute, happy family, but of course she's stuck on this island, and she wants to know more about the world, and she wants to see, is it like the books that I've read? I want to see the world. And she also starts to discover that there's more to her father figure and his past than she has been told, and he gives her the opportunity to accompany him off the island, as it would seem the island is becoming dangerous anyway. Maybe the wards are failing. And this sort of plot line that takes over becomes very much the coming of age portion of it. It's historical fantasy. It's very cozy. I think it very much highlights that feeling of, as you're growing up, you're being exposed to more wonders of the world, but also more atrocities and hardships. And it makes you reflect on your own life and be grateful for what you have. But it doesn't change that you do want something for yourself, that sense of independence. You want to navigate the world on your own while still having these people in your life that you love. Anyway, I just thought it did all those things so well. And I just love the familiar in this. It's so cute. The family element was fantastic. So I think there's a lot to it. A lot of people would really like. It's just not, it's not the most unique. It's not the most compelling, action-packed, or anything like that, but there's a lot to it that I think a lot of people would really enjoy. Engines of Chaos. I know, I knew it wasn't going to be on there, but I just need more people to read this series. It's so good. So if you like epic fantasy, multiple POV, morally gray characters, a really intense world where it feels like you're right on the cusp of technology starting to become more prevalent, but then that works in some ways against the population, because then it means that the guilds that are in charge of, I said if you like, and then I'm starting to list just like what the book has, but anyway, it's very good about showing the way that the guilds are going to try and make as much profit as possible, and the general populace doesn't always want that. Sometimes it results in people being worked too much, or it results in other places being taken advantage of, and basically them going after their resources and disregarding other civilizations for their own. But you follow one of the guilds, and in the sequel you actually start to open up and you see the way that religion starts to clash with the guilds, but also the way magic is a part of all of it. It's so good. The characters are not ones that I'm like, oh, I love these characters, they're my favorite. They're not Kaladin from Stormlight Archive, but I find all of them interesting, engaging. I've said before, I don't like comparing things to Game of Thrones because I feel like everybody had for a while, not people on BookTube, but I just mean like every TV show that was coming out, it's like, is this the next Game of Thrones? And you're like, dude, no, it's not even close to being like Game of Thrones. What? But this is really like the closest thing I can think of to Game of Thrones as far as the characters, the way everybody's plot lines are interwoven, the moral ambiguity, I'll say, of a lot of our characters, and the just pure what the heck is going on with the magic sometimes. Because you know how in Game of Thrones, it's not a magic system. When you're watching the show, you're like, I guess that can happen, and you are like, all right, I'm gonna go with that, I suppose. And this book has a little bit of that. Oh, it's so good. I want more people to read the series. The first one is Engines of Empire, and then we have Engines of Chaos. I do think it takes a while to get acclimated to the world and accustomed to the characters, but really, if you like epic fantasy, I just feel like it's a good series for it. After that, we have The Crane Husband. The Crane Husband, to me, has all of the ingredients for a Goodreads nominee. It's a little bit out there. It feels like it's a retelling of sorts, because I think that the nominees love those, and it's very abstract and it's weird, but it's also very poignant and sad and really illustrates very well its themes. If you don't know, the themes for The Crane Husband have to do with, there's others, but the main one is how domestic abuse really affects the children in a house, and I thought it did it exceptionally. It captured that so well, and it utilizing the crane element, I thought did a good job of having the focus be where it belonged, which was on, in this case, our main character. And she has a little brother, but you're kind of focusing on her mainly, and she's a teenage girl. And the point is not to focus on the abuser, it's the effects of the abuse, which I think the metaphor and the bizarre nature of the crane being incorporated into it did that very well. It's so good, and I was really surprised that it wasn't on the list. I do wonder, and I'll have a video about the Goodreads snubs that I actually kind of get why they're not on the list. I do wonder if this one being a novella is part of it. The eligibility does not say that something has to be a full-length novel, but I didn't really see any novellas, so I'm wondering if that's why it wasn't there, but I think it deserved to be on the list. And last for today would be The Weaver and the Witch Queen. I was convinced this one would be on there. Witch's Heart was on there, which is a book by this author. And I was like, well, Witch's Heart was also really good, but it's not. I mentioned Atalanta earlier being on there and thinking it wouldn't be. And at first, when I didn't see Weaver and the Witch Queen, I was like, is Goodreads finally past its mythology retellings? And then I saw Atalanta, Clytemnestra, and another one. I don't know. There was still the mythology retellings. I was like, oh no, that's not it. But this one, it's not necessarily a mythology retelling. It's more of like a saga retelling. It's more historical fantasy as opposed to taking a mythology and then just focusing on different people within it than what we typically see. I really enjoyed this one. I felt like the feel of it being these people living in this very cold environment and just trying to survive was done really well. I think Genevieve Gornichek feels like somebody who really knows what her source material, you could say, is. And in this case, it's like this time and place in history. And any tweaks she makes, it feels like there's a lot of thought put into why, and it's for the betterment of the story overall. I really enjoyed this one quite a bit. I think if you're somebody who likes historical fantasy, then this is definitely one worth checking out. This is one of the ones on this list that I'm like, yeah, no, I for sure thought it would be on there, and I kind of can't believe that it's not. So that's sad for me. Not for me. It's sad for the book. I think it deserved to be on there. But anyway, that's it for some fantasy snubs. I would love to know what are some books that you really thought should have been on there, and they're not even ones that you're like, I wish they'd been, but I get why they weren't. No, you really thought that they were going to be there, they should have been there. And then what are some ones that you're like, I knew it was a long shot, but I was still hoping that they would show up. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.